All right, so this is my fourth long-term goal assignment, and the focus of this presentation is on vocabulary. The long-term goal that will be addressed by the strategies offered later in this presentation is to increase vocabulary knowledge and ability to use a wide variety of vocabulary words. The instructional goal that goes along with this long-term goal is to increase the number of words recognized automatically on site or the student's site vocabulary. Vocabulary Vocabulary has a fundamental role in the reading process and is crucial to reading comprehension. Children learn most word meanings indirectly, like through everyday experiences with oral and written language, while other words are learned through carefully designed instruction. Vocabulary encompasses the words that we need to understand in order to communicate effectively. There are four types of vocabulary: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Listening vocabulary is all about the words that we need to know to understand what we hear, and speaking vocabulary deals with the words we use when we speak. Reading vocabulary holds the words we need to know when we read, and writing vocabulary holds the words we use when we write. Kids who hear more words spoken at home will learn more words and enter school with stronger vocabularies, which pays off in the end as that child progresses through school. Vocabulary is key to reading comprehension. If the reader doesn't know what the word means, they cannot understand what the text is trying to say. As a child is reading and encounters new words, they need to learn the meanings of those words in order to understand what the text is saying, and so that they can add those new words to their vocabulary. Teachers should provide both indirect opportunities for students to add to their vocabularies and direct instruction on certain vocabulary words. Indirect vocabulary learning happens in three different ways. The student engages daily in oral language, they listen to adults read to them, and they read a lot on their own. Direct vocabulary learning is the direct instruction of new vocabulary words, mainly words that are specific to academic content the student is working with. So at the start of a new unit, the teacher would want to run through all of the new vocabulary words that the student will be encountering. During direct instruction, teachers can provide students with word attack strategies like analyzing word parts or using context clues to determine the meaning of new words as well. In 2000, vocabulary was identified as one of the five major components of reading. It has been found to be important for overall school success and especially important in reading comprehension. This has been widely documented. Vocabulary can be generally defined as the knowledge of words and word meanings. Vocabulary is something that expands and deepens over time and exposure to new texts. The research synthesis cited at the end of this presentation identified 8 findings that have been proven in research to be a strong base of vocabulary instruction and have been used throughout time in vocabulary instruction. Direct instruction of vocabulary words for a specific text or content area is key to students actually learning those new words. Repetition and multiple exposures to vocabulary words are important so students will actually learn those words and commit them to memory. Vocabulary words should be words that the students will find useful in many different contexts. We want our students to transfer their learning from one content area to the next. So by using new words that are able to be easily transferred, this will happen more easily. Vocabulary text should be restructured as necessary, which relates to the best practices of a literacy teacher because ongoing monitoring and adjustment will ensure that the students are always learning and pushing themselves to succeed. Vocabulary learning is effective when it entails active engagement that goes beyond definitional knowledge. So, the activities that students do to learn new vocabulary should be more than just identifying the definition of that new word. Computer technology is very effective in helping to teach students new vocabulary as well. Vocabulary can be acquired through incidental learning, and students should be aware that they are always able to learn new words. Using multiple instructional methods for vocabulary instruction provides students with a richer vocabulary. It is also important to ensure that the vocabulary activities and instruction you provide your students is appropriate for the student's age and their reading ability. Now we're going to take a look at a couple of theories that relate to vocabulary instruction. So associationism looks at how events or ideas can be related to one another in the mind, resulting in learning and associating one thing to another. So this happens through building on and relating to prior knowledge, which is a real life classroom application of this theory and is very important to student learning. So, in relation to vocabulary, students are taking new words and relating the new words to what they already know when they are learning in vocabulary instruction. Schema theory is all about the way that we store information in our minds. When we learn new words, they're either put into an already existing category in our schema or a new category is created for that word. So each time a student learns a new word, either indirectly or through direct instruction, that word is put into their long-term memory and stored in the schema. Social learning theory, a big part of student vocabulary is learned incidentally, so through conversations with other students, through conversations with the teacher. So by allowing time for the students to interact socially in the classroom or through group work, they are improving their vocabularies from learning from their peers. And then, as mentioned before, family literacy is key to early success with vocabulary. So the more words that a child hears before entering school, the better their vocabularies are. And this leads to more success in reading down the road. The literacy in a child's home has a major impact on their vocabulary development later on. The rest of this PowerPoint will be used to describe different strategies and activities that can be done in the classroom to address the long-term goal of increasing vocabulary and knowledge and the ability to use a wide variety of vocabulary words, and the instructional strategy of increasing the number of words recognized automatically on site or the student's site vocabulary. So strategy number one is called word pairs, and it focuses on two words and how those two words relate to each other. So the teacher would give students words in pairs and have them evaluate if those words are the same, if they are the opposite, or if they go together, or if they're unrelated. So if they mean the same thing, if they're opposite things, if they go together, or if they are completely not related at all. So this activity helps with sight words because the students are repeatedly looking at the words mentioned on the history slide. I talked about how like repetition and multiple exposure to words is so important. So by just doing this activity, they're seeing these new words over and over again, and they're constantly looking at them. And it also helps with vocabulary building because students need to know what these words mean in order to compare them to each other. I think this activity would be best done in a small group, so the teacher could closely monitor what the students are marking and have conversations right then and there if the student is having a misconception. So the best practices that go along with a small group of time is best practice 4, which is provide students with small group differentiated instruction that reflects the complex nature of literacy, and best practice 8, which talks about replacing less relevant guided practice with more authentic experiences. So having them actually compare these two words and physically look at them and think about the meaning is a much better use of guided practice time. The next activity is called Word Wheel, and this is a short-term activity as well because it would only be used once in a while with new vocabulary words for the students. So if you're introducing new words to a unit, this would be a fun way to do that. So you use the spinner pictured on the slide to have the students do something funky with their new vocabulary words. You would assign a word to each student, let them spin the wheel, and then they will do what they land on using the word that they were assigned. So as I mentioned before, this is a fun way to introduce vocabulary for a unit, and the students can really get involved in it. You could also do this assignment a different way and have your students have all of the words for the unit, and they could just spin the wheel each word and do the thing that they land on. So if the word was cat and they spun the wheel and got draw it, they would draw a cat. And if the next word was bat, they could spin it and find out, act it out. They could act like a bat. So there's two different ways you could go about this activity. The best practices that go along with this activity are best practice 1, which is implement practices that invite students to be active contributing members. So they're up moving around, they are spinning the wheel, they're getting involved in this activity. And best practice 2, they understand that maintaining an engaged community requires ongoing monitoring and adjustment of literacy practices. So if you found that one of these activities on the spinner was just not working or not interesting to your students, you could maybe ask them what they would like to see on the wheel and change it, and you're just adjusting the words throughout. So those are both ways to meet that best practice. Moving on to long-term strategies. This next strategy is a long-term strategy because it would be used throughout the school year, and it lets the students practice their um, it lets the students see their new vocabulary words throughout the year. This strategy is a vocabulary word wall, and it can be on display in the front of the classroom for all the students to see and use on a daily basis. They should be encouraged to use the words on the wall in their classroom discussions and in their writing pieces. As students are introduced to the new words, you place a large card on the wall to add to the class's vocabulary. So you continue to add new words as they are being used in the classroom. Throughout the year, revisit the words that are on the wall to solidify them in the student's vocabulary. So this also meets best practice 1 because you're having the students look at the wall and use those words in their day-to-day conversations. And it meets best practice number 2 because the students are engaged in the literacy community and you're ongoing and the teacher is monitoring and adjusting by adding those new words and making sure that the wall is up to date. If the teacher chooses to use technology to share this word wall with the students at home or to send it in electronic home to their parents, it would meet best practice 10, which is provide instruction in and practice with technology that expands concepts and modes of communication. The final activity I have identified is virtual visualization. This is a long-term strategy because it could be used throughout the year with each new text that the class is reading. So when you're getting ready to read a new text or passage, you would want to pull out some of the more visual pieces or pieces of the text that contain confusing words and have the students try to create that picture in their mind. So when they come across a word that they don't know, you can help provide them the definition and give them a visual on the screen that they can see to give them some more context to that word. So you're helping them learn the vocabulary needed for the visualization, and you're allowing them to see this visualization before reading the story. This is important for students encountering a new word that is also a key to the overall image of the story. So the teacher can pull up images of the words on the screen for the students to see. Say if you're reading a text that comes from another part of the world, then there may be some words that mean something different in that part of the world than they do here when we're reading. So the class needs to be aware of that. As you can see on the picture, there's a pair of sneakers, but in a British text, they might call those trainers. And the students reading that text might be confused by the term trainers. So you want to provide them with the visual that when we see the word trainers, we know that they're talking about sneakers. Or same thing with the jumper. If they say jumper in the text, we know that they're talking about a sweater. So then your students don't get confused while they're reading the text. And this goes along with best practices 1 and 2 yet again. And here are all the references that I used to create this presentation.